All right. Atheistic preacher. Welcome.
Hi, Dr. Bowen. Hi, Dr. Kip.
Hey, how's it
Great to
going?
see you guys on. I had messaged you, I think a few weeks ago, Dr. Bowen, about a position I took in a debate regarding to Exodus 21 and a couple parts of Deuteronomy. And you had welcomed me to catch you at some point and, just run my position on you to see if it was,
Good.
at the very least, consistent, not just to
Okay.
scripture, but also to history, and if I'm wrong, where am I wrong? I'll try to make this quick. I won't try to keep you. But it's my understanding that in Exodus 21, we're talking about Hebrew to Hebrew relations, or at the very least inside of the Hebrew nation. So I think that when it's referring, I think by context is showing that the slaves that are mentioned in this chapter are referring to indentured servants. Majority Hebrew, and since we do see in Leviticus 25 and I think Leviticus 19 that it is possible for non-Hebrews that are sojourning among the nation of Israel to also partake in their customs, they could also partake in indentured servitude, whether taking a Hebrew as an indentured servant or vice versa. There are some customs that they're able to partake in. But this would be an indentured servitude situation, and that's why when we see the cruelty of, taking an eye or taking a tooth and permanently disfiguring somebody, that then leaves the contract null and void. I think that when we look at passages like Exodus 21:16, I think that ties in with Deuteronomy 24, 7, I think,
7,
where it, clarifies that, or Deuteronomy is clarifying what the law was speaking about and saying that, we're talking about kidnapping Hebrew people, or at the very least, again, free people, the people that are underneath this protection living within the nation of Israel, but very specifically talking about Hebrew people, because when verses are pointed out about, well, a slave can escape, and they have to be given a lot, that's clearly by context showing us that these are foreign slaves that are escaping from foreign places. Because if they were there originally, then they would just go home to their own house, right? If their contract with them be null and void, and they would just go home to what they already had. So, they wouldn't have to be given a house or land or anything like that. So is anything about what I'm arguing about biblical slavery and how it's done inconsistent with the text, the context, or historical, evidence and data?
No, I mean, I think everything you've said is fairly mainstream. So I tend to be a little more conservative, and I think, Kip, you're less conservative on this point, which is good. I tend to think that the covenant code originally, probably Exodus 21:16, did not have that specificity in mind of just Israelites. I think it was probably just a blanket law, as in things that we see in the Ten Commandments themselves. However, I mean, I don't think there's any question about this. Everybody's going to agree to this. Deuteronomy 24:7, which most people would see as a later text, that's working to update the covenant code, or to make some changes, or to make some clarifications, certainly does make that update. And when you look at the Septuagint and how the Septuagint translates Exodus 21:16, it does specify the children of Israel. So obviously you're in very good company with scholars that hold that position, and I'm not necessarily. I don't have a strong hold. I tend to think that it was general, just like a generally applicable rule, that they didn't have any specific, group in mind, be they Israelite or otherwise. I think it was just a rule. But I think as you and I both know, it really doesn't have an awful lot to do with slavery, as far as how I hear it used so often. Well, look, if you can't kidnap people, then there couldn't be any slavery. I mean, it's just sort of a silly notion. But yes, so yes, I think you're in good company there. I tend to think it was more general, and then sort of was reworked to specify it. And then, yeah, I think your position on Deuteronomy 23, 15 to 16 or 16 to 17 in the Hebrew is correct. There is a way that I think it'd be very difficult to read that as an Israelite escaping. There is the possibility, and you could read somebody like Samuel Gringus on this. He has a nice little section on it in his book on the laws, where it is possible that it could be a foreigner who is enslaved in Israel escaping away from a master in Israel. I think there are other problems with that. I think it sort of undermines the system as a whole, which doesn't seem like something that they would do. Also, I think, the fact that the book of Deuteronomy is very big on Israel and how they're interacting with their neighbors fits well with extradition, non-extradition treaties or clauses in treaties, which I think fits well. And that's why I think most of the people that have written about that passage hold to that being, as you said, foreigners escaping from foreign lands into Israel. Because, we have passages in the Hebrew Bible where we see slaves escaping. Shimei is a good example of this, slaves escaping. And, it's just assumed they're going to go get them back. So that would surprise me if it were foreigners escaping in land. Kip, did you have anything that you wanted to?
No, I think you covered that. This is certainly something that you are better read on than I am as a rule. So I'm always happy to defer to you about this.
Would it be fair to conclude that when we're looking in Exodus 21 and determining whether this is, a slave or indentured servant and the kidnapping and stuff like that, when it comes to the kidnapping, and if we're not going to make a more specific idea of this is just about Hebrews specifically written in Exodus, could we at the very least conclude that this is very much talking about free people?
Yeah, so I think there's really only one place that I would say is almost certainly about two places, I suppose, in the text that are speaking about chattel slaves. The first is, what you see with the wife and the children in verses 2 to 6. They are very clearly chattel slaves, owned as property, and also in Kip, is that you microwaving?
Yeah, sorry.
So no, you're good.
It's dinner time for the dogs.
No, I hear you. But I think in 28 to 32 with the goring ox law, this and again, the way that we determine this sort of thing is we look at what is the law saying about how this particular infraction of law is to be adjudicated. And in this case, as Raymond Westbrook points out quite well, Exodus 21, 20 to 21, 26 to 27 are treating the slave under family law, which is, again, a really good indication this is talking about a debt slave. It fits well with other laws that we have in the ancient Near East about debt slavery. So these are people that are assumed to be ultimately, to be freed. So they're debt slaves or they're pledges or they're distrainees, whatever. In 28 to 32, it's pretty clear that this is falling under property law more than family law. So you can see, because what happens with the slave that is gored is that it's a fine of 30 shekels of silver paid to the master of that slave. So I think it's pretty clear to determine from what the law is prescribing for the individual under or in question, what sort of category they fall into.
All right, awesome. And then I did have one more question about Exodus 21, if I could, real quick. And it's not related to the indentured servitude or slavery, but in between those, for verses 22, when it talks about the men fighting and hurting a pregnant woman, and whether it causes further harm or not because her fruit departs from her, is that indeed something as referred to a miscarriage or an early pregnancy that delivers a live baby?
So I have a section on this because I have the second appendix to the Old Testament Endorse slavery is on all of the battery laws from the ancient Near East, because this sort of thing comes up so frequently with the eye and the tooth, and of course this passage that you're describing. So we have pretty good parallels for this law in the rest of the A&E law collections, and what we see here is pretty consistent. Now, the difficulty with it is that the Hebrew is it uses some lexemes that are a little difficult to figure out what exactly they mean. There's a word that's used there, ason, and what that means is not at all straightforward. And people have written articles on this, of course, and talk about it in commentaries. But if we utilize A&E parallels, and again, I go into a lot more detail in the book about this, it seems like what's happening here is that in both cases, the fetus unalives. And so the fetus, it's a miscarriage. It's not a live baby that's being delivered. So what the law is asking, the question that it's asking is, okay, so we have this situation where a pregnant woman gets hit, and there's a miscarriage. If there is no further damage done to the woman, then here's the penalty, and it's a fine that's set, right? However, and there can be negotiations on it, whatever. But if there is further damage to the woman, then you are to, this is where the lex talionis, first comes in. So, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now, part of the reason outside of those A&E parallels that scholars tend to think that this is, almost certainly damage to the woman, bodily injury to the woman and not to the fetus, is that these sort of things wouldn't really apply to a fetus in this situation, right? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn. Like these things, these are things that would really seemingly possibly apply to the woman. You could make the argument that this is just trying to set general precedent about lex talionis, and that's a pushback that would have to be dealt with. But again, the Hebrew makes it a little tricky, but I think most people in the field come down on this being a miscarriage in both cases. Is there damage to further bodily injury to the woman or not?
All right, awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate your time as well, Dr. Kipp, and I'll let someone else jump up. But thank you for taking the time to listen to my position and helping me think about it more.
Oh, of course. Thank you for coming up. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming up.
All right. Well,
think about it more.
Oh, of course. Thank you for coming up. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming up.